Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nick Zulovich, part of the team at Cherokee Media Group and senior editor of AutoFin Journal and Subprime Auto Finance News. In today's webinar, Protect Your Margins by Improving Inventory Marketing Efficiency, we're going to learn more from Mark Connor, who is Senior Vice President of Channel Strategy at LotLinx. But before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. Please make sure you've dialed in using the phone number provided in your communication email, or you're able to listen via your PC speakers. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll make the recording available to you as soon as possible. You will be in listen-only mode for this webinar, but we will reserve some time after the presentation for a Q&A segment. You can submit your questions at any time through the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And if we aren't able to get to your question today, don't worry, because we'll forward it to the team at LotLinx so they can respond back to you directly via email. And lastly, if you have any difficulty during today's webinar, please click on the hand icon to alert a member of our team. So with plenty of knowledge and recommendations to share, let's get right to Mark for our webinar. Mark, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Nick, and good day, everybody. Morning, afternoon, depending on what end of the country you're on today. Wanted to kind of review and share some of the insights and some of the things that myself and the team at LotLinx are working on and seeing across the country today in terms of marketing, and some of what we see as some of the emerging trends in marketing efficiencies, and then how that's affecting margin and what's going on with our gross profits and net profits of our stores today. So with that said, we're going to spend a little bit of time just kind of level setting what we see as impacting the margins and what's happening inside the industry a little bit. We're going to pull that back a layer or two on that and just break those apart and get an understanding exactly what's affecting the P&L lines on our statements on that stuff. And then we're going to kind of reverse that script around, and then we're going to look at how and what we can do to affect that moving forward. What are we seeing and working with, some sophisticated automotive marketers? What are they looking at? What are they paying attention to? What are the things that are helping them move the needle? The one thing I'll say at the beginning of all of this as we go through, like most things, automotive marketing is evolving today. Just putting an ad out there, just putting your vehicle up on your website, just having a price on the vehicle, it takes a few more things than just those basics anymore today. So if you're really going to own and dominate your market today, we're going to go through kind of what some of the key metrics and some of the key traits that we'll need to pay attention to as marketers to make that difference for our stores. So with that, we'll kind of get started here. And again, I wanted to kind of level set what we see happening in the industry, what we are forecasting for the year, etc. So with that, the industry is at healthy sales volumes. There's a lot of discussions, and when you look at the headlines, it looks almost like doom and gloom. But for myself, I've been in automotive marketing and automotive retail for all of my career. I've spent 20 plus years in one of the major automotive groups, one of the public major groups, doing marketing for all of their 150 plus stores. So when I look at a sales environment where we're selling 16.5 to 17 million vehicles in a year, that's healthy sales volumes. And those are all volumes in which, most stores are pretty profitable and all of that. What we're seeing happen right now, and we'll get into it, is some of the trends of what's happening to margins and all of that with the competitiveness of the marketplace out there. Also, we're seeing consumer preferences change from vehicles to trucks and what that means for us and how we're marketing. Because each one of those segments between crossover, SUV, light truck, heavy duty truck, passenger car, how we position our models in those segments makes all of the difference for us realizing, those incremental or additional sales to be for our stores throughout the month there. So when you look at the headlines, it might be a little bit of doom and gloom. I can tell you, for all those of us that have been around in the industry and, lived through 2008, 2009, 2010, we would take a 17 million SAR level as, doing cartwheels and shouting from the rooftops, because that would be epically good compared to the 9.5 to the 10 million that we saw back then. So at any rate, I mean, these are healthy sales levels for us to be profitable. That's really what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. What are the things that are eroding away on that margin, and what does it take to be profitable in those years going forward? So you see, I mean, the trend forecast going out for the next several years, we're predicted to be at these levels for the next few years. You've got good interest rates, we got low gas prices, we got consumer confidence high, good job markets. With all those things in place, car sales look good for the next few years. It's going to bump along in the 17 million range. Thinking about that and thinking about what's happening inside the dealership and what's happening to our overall profitability, from NADA, looked at the last 3 years, complete years for dealerships and what's happening to overall profitability. And we can see that retail gross profit per unit, we see it kind of dwindling down. What's really important, though, is what's happening to our net profit. When we factor in things like flooring, holding costs, marketing, personnel, etc., commissions, we see what's really happening there is our gross per units are holding somewhat similar. There's basically, in the last couple of years, about $100 of difference in gross. It's coming down a little bit, and really that's really from the competition in the marketplace with flattening sales and dealers doing what we do, competing against the other dealer in town there. That's really what we're seeing on the retail gross profit side of things. So gross profits are holding in there, though it's down a little bit, and that's really the sales pressure that we see in the marketplace. Where the big shining difference is coming is at the bottom line side of it, and really at the net profit side of the equation there. We can see for $100, basically $100 change in the last 3 years of gross profit, what that's meant in net profit reduction of over $250 net profit reduction there. So, a short way to say this is, today for every new vehicle that we're selling right now, we basically are paying the consumer $570 to drive that new car off the lot. Why do we do that? How does that seem like a sustainable business? Obviously, we need to take into account what happens to fixed operations, used vehicles, the opportunities through F&I. So, I mean, we're just looking at the vehicle sales side of the equation here. But nonetheless, I mean, operating like this and continuing to see the erosion in net profit, that's a concern for us. And really kind of the crust of what we're going to dive into today is what we're doing about it and what we're seeing happen here. So as all those margins get crushed there, it's coming from basically a few different areas. Again, I expect everybody on the line to know these things intuitively, but we'll just kind of level set through as we go through here. Advertising, according to NADA, advertising per vehicle, and this is pre-co-op or outside of co-op, so co-op will bring the number down. We're seeing advertising, or NADA reports advertising cost at $642 per vehicle before co-op. That's up from $628 last year. And then we see flooring, rent, and the equivalents. That would be commission and all of that. We're seeing those costs continue to rise as well. The biggest contributor is flooring and the rate change that we've seen over the last 16 to 18 months in rates. So as rates have gone up, the amount of flooring assistance that we get to offset what we're paying in our flooring lines there and stuff, it's not covering as much as what it did back in 2014, 15, 16, and then we saw the rise of rates from the end of 16 through 17 into 18 there. So with that, the big area for us dealers, I mean, outside of personnel expense, marketing is the next biggest single line item on any dealer's financials. And marketing costs are continuing to go up. Again, all things that we know, But when you take a look at the forecast here of what's trending to be happening here over the next couple of years, we're seeing, if you look at the graph on the right side there, we're seeing overall marketing digital ad spend is going to be more than double what we were spending back in 2014 by 2020. So with that kind of eking up there, what we're seeing is with that appreciation of our costs there's a lot of redundancy in our overall marketing. And really the questions that we need to start looking and asking ourselves is, how is the marketing affecting my sales? How is the marketing that I'm doing affecting each one of these vehicles? And are there other ways or other strategies to gain out efficiencies? Because again, a curve like this with marketing expenses continuing to rise is unsustainable when our net profit is continuing to go down like it is. So with that said, we also see, internet spend for most of our stores, again, coming out of NADA, it's almost 60%, likely to be probably 2/3 in the next year to two of overall spend. Traditional media, direct mail will always play a role in it, but, digital ad spend is continuing to consume, the lion's share of a dealer's budget there. And that with costs continuing to rise and with our bid costs continuing to go up as, the competition gets a little fiercer for that shopper as we go through there. Again, those are some of the threats that we're facing as we continue to evolve out or continue to grow out here. And in a flat market where sales aren't going up, but our spends are going to continue going up because of the competition levels, we're going to have to start thinking about different ways of approaching that. This graph just makes the point, a broader point across the industry. You might be sitting here saying, well, Mark, it looks like dealership advertising expense in 2018 actually went down some, but you said a couple of slides ago that it actually was going up. Expense per vehicle is going up. Total ad spend in the industry is coming down somewhat. Why is that? It's really because of co-op. So when you think about, when new vehicles were at 17.5, 18 million SAR levels, and then it comes down to 17 million SAR, what you're seeing there is that little tail coming off there. It means with less vehicles being sold, there's less co-op out there being spent. So the overall size of the market is coming down a little bit, but what's happening inside the market and what we're having to spend to be competitive and get our cars in front of those shoppers is increasing. And that's really the point to make there. Marketing is always going to continue to rise. It's just kind of the capitalism of marketing and the market forces inside there. So the question becomes is, how do we yield out a strategy and a plan that we can yield greater efficiency and effectiveness from the dollars that we are spending? Because I think all of us would agree, that the marketing dollars that we're spending, we seem like those budgets are pretty topped out. An average dealership spend is somewhere between $50,000 to $60,000 a month. Some stores are a little bit less, some stores obviously a lot more in bigger markets, etc. But across the mean, the average is at 50, 60. So when you think about these rising costs, can I really sustain another 10% increase in my marketing budget? And what does that mean to me? We really got to start looking at it from an efficiency and effective standpoint and coming into it with a plan and a strategy to approach that. The other side of that equation, or the other big line item expense that we all have from the dealer perspective, is our floor planning. And so again, to level set, what floor planning is really that credit line for us to put cars, new and used cars, on the lot there. Interesting to note here, on a $35,000 vehicle, a point of interest adds just over $29 a month to a single piece of inventory. So for every rise in our interest rate there, we're adding about $30 of holding cost to each one of those units. Now, everybody has got at least 100 units on the lot, and when you start doing that kind of math, we see why flooring has eked up and has grown incrementally over these last couple of years with the rate changes that we've all seen there. So flooring becomes a big factor of what is happening to our net profits for dealership or for our car sales there, and becomes the next area for us really to start factoring in, how do we market these vehicles and which vehicles make sense to get rid of or to sell through a little quicker. So Again, when you take a look at the franchises that have, that seem to have the larger inventories here, obviously it's going to be on the domestic side. It'll be franchises with trucks as well. So what I'm showing there on the right is total inventory size of what's being held there. So if you're a General Motors store, Ford store, those are big brands, a lot of model lines, and a lot of inventory that's being held. The average day supply today, we're seeing upwards of 70 plus days at all of the domestics, and we're seeing 45 plus days on the import side of it. When you get down to the luxury brands and some of the European luxury brands there, we don't get quite the inventory holding just because of the way allocation works with them, etc. The other side of this that we need to be thinking about when we think about our flooring and all of that is exactly the allocation curve that we see a lot with the domestics and how they build inventory in over a period of time. And then they, bring inventory in at the beginning of a selling season, sell it down over the selling season, and then you start back up. And we're coming into another one of those inventory build periods as we start changing out the models, coming new model lines, starting, August into September, October. So we had a big inventory build in the spring months. We're in the summer selling months. The goal or the objective is to be selling these down. We can see right now that our number of vehicles on the lot, we do see day supply rising a little bit. Again, it's a concern because the ride's been a couple of days. It's not alarming because it hasn't changed drastically, but you add a couple more days to holding there, and look what it'll do to an overall holding cost. If it costs $30 a month on just 1 point of rate, what's a couple of days more of holding onto that piece of inventory going to do to your holding costs? Again, $4 or $5 might not seem like a lot, but when you extrapolate that across a couple hundred new units sitting on the lot, starts adding up fairly quickly and eroding away on the net profit margin side of things. So that's the kind of level set, what are the big factors that are influencing what's happening to our margins and where the industry is kind of trending at right now. Let's take a look at and think about what it is that we do to affect these things, and how do we curb days on lot? How do we affect when a vehicle starts getting old? We all know that, as a car ages, it's a depreciating asset, and we generally are going after the price of that vehicle. That usually has been the biggest lever for us dealers to pull on and to use when we're trying to affect that vehicle and get it to move off of the lot. So most dealers have rules about aging. If it's used, there's usually a 60 or 90-day aging rule. On new, we see as the vehicles age out, we see incentives or incentive spends on those things increasing as the model, ages out from the manufacturer. We get to the end of a model run, we see incentive spend going up. I would also say some of the more, I'm having more and more conversations within groups about new car aging and looking at the marketing and how that's affecting and what that should be doing to new car pricing in much the same way that we were doing on used. I would submit to you that might not be the most profitable way to look at new cars, because new cars, as they age out, it really has to do with incentive spending in there, etc. I would also say on used cars, changing the retail price of a used car and then seeing it sell through, that may not be the best way to look at our used cars either. And we went and did a study. We looked at a 90-day sell down rate of 158 stores in Texas. What we found is, they had a repricing rule of their inventory every 10 to 2 weeks. These vehicles that were still on the lot, as they were aging out, they were repricing through. That's been common sense, good business practice for a very long time. I'm not saying that should change. What I'm saying is, as we reprice a vehicle today, there might be a few more things that we need to take into consideration than just the age of the vehicle and what its price is to market. Oftentimes, we'll see a vehicle that is priced right on the dealer's lot, but is still there at 30 days, 45 days. And we're then having to reprice it and cut that margin there. And what we saw in our study was for every $300 of price change, we created one more additional VDP deal. So that's a lot of margin to be giving up there. I would tell you today, that is an old school way of pricing and marketing that really is affecting our margins today and what we're earning on those vehicles today. What we're looking at here is kind of a newer way to think about your marketing and the effects it's having on the vehicles on the lot, and what vehicles really need the attention and the marketing focus. So what we're seeing here is across the bottom there, those gray bars, each one of those boxes, and those are individual boxes, this is a pretty large store with 375 plus vehicles in it, represent a unique piece of inventory to that store. The red boxes indicate a vehicle that does not have photos, so it's got just standard photos there. What we're looking at there is in the stack graph are the VDP views by source for each one of those vehicles. Curiously, most stores look similar to this when we look at their VDP views and their VDP marketing activity across the board there. You can see that about 20%, so the first couple of vehicles there, the first first half of that, not even half, the first third of that, these are all vehicles that are gaining what we would argue are probably enough VDP activity that vehicle is going to sell through in the next 30 days. We all know VDP activity is that leading indicator to a sale. And we know in order to create that sale, we've got to generate that activity. When we see that activity, the car quickly sells. And that's what pricing did for us, is when we changed the vehicle price, the bet is that my VDP activity would increase, and sometimes we saw that, and then that thing would sell through. What I would submit to you today is that there's tools and capabilities today to go out and to start leveling marketing towards the vehicles that need the VDP activity before I have to change price. So when you think about pricing is just one piece of the equation. But if I've got a vehicle that's priced to market, and think about your off-make used sitting on your lot. If you've got a Jeep Wrangler sitting on my Toyota lot, that car that's a pretty desirable piece of inventory in the market, but it might not be getting enough VDP attention because it's not a natural place that people are going to come look at for a used Wrangler on a Toyota lot. So really the question becomes is that needs marketing attention more than it needs pricing. I don't need to give up margin and gross profit on that Wrangler. What I need is to get marketing attention to it. And that's really what we're graphing out here on the chart here is what are the vehicles that need attention and how is my marketing affecting each one of these? As I get further over to the right and I see that these vehicles don't have any VDP activity, and that's what the green and the blue and the yellow are showing are the different sources of VDP activity. The question becomes is how do I direct more of that $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 marketing budget and get behind the vehicles that need the attention? These are vehicles that I've got priced to market. They just don't have enough marketing attention. So repricing that vehicle may not necessarily speed up its time to sell or it stays on lot. Really what it does is it gives up margin. How does it affect the sale is by repricing it. It moves it to the top of all of our listing site search results that we have out there and all of our other marketing. And now that thing becomes such a raging deal that it starts building an audience and following because of its price, not because of the uniqueness of that piece of inventory. And that's really what the point today is that we see marketers today developing strategies around these types of things and making a price decision is more or less the last piece of it. And that all operates under the assumption that when you're pricing your vehicle, you're competitive with the market, okay? So I would gauge competitiveness of a vehicle price somewhere between 95 and 105% of market. If it's a good piece, if it's that Wrangler on a Toyota lot, that vehicle should bring all of the market and maybe a skosh or two higher than that. But if it's a Chevy Malibu on that Toyota lot, it was a big purchase that I made from Enterprise or whatever, then you might be, you're probably going to be priced closer to the 95% mark, just because you know that you're going to have to draw attention there, not only with price, but then with marketing. But the strategies that we're starting to have bigger and more conversations about today is the VDP activity. We said a second ago, that's the leading indicator to the sell. The time on the lot, if I've got, if I'm averaging a VDP view a day, logic says that in the next 30 days, that'll sell. We know that it takes 25 to 30 VDP views to sell. So if my objective is to sell through these things within 30 days, I need to be generating at least a VDP view a day on that vehicle. The closer that vehicle gets to sale, the more intensity we see in the VDP views. So if I'm generating at least a VDP view a day, I know that that thing is going to be on it, that will sell through over the next 30 days. And then becomes the marketing side of the whole thing. Am I better off to go and engage a specific inventory marketing spend on that particular vehicle or model line rather than just throwing out, a price discount or some broad-based campaign that says, hey, I got everything's on sale this weekend, come on in, and I hang more balloons on the cars. That's not really going to get it done in today's market. You're going to have a little bit more of a strategy behind those things. And that's where we see a lot of conversations happening amongst all the groups, and the really smart automotive marketers out there are really starting to kind of focus in on some of these metrics and some of these details. And with that, they're kind of bucketing them up into these kind of campaign strategy ideas. They're taking the inventory and saying, okay, my risk vehicles, these are vehicles that are at risk of aging out or of being marked down, and I'm giving up that precious margin on the thing. And again, I know I'm overstating or repeating here, but it's worth repeating in the sense that I cannot stress enough how many times I see vehicles getting marked down that $300, $400, $500, and it really wasn't a price issue that car had. It just didn't have enough attention it was getting in the marketplace. And there's ways to go out and get that today. And those are the advanced marketers we see are utilizing those strategies today to do that. Some of the other things are kind of bucketing out here are vehicles that have got, that are incentivized, whether I've got a stair-step program on from the manufacturer or whatever. They'll bundle those up into a model campaign to go out into the market and say, okay, I can leverage up some of my profitability and ebb the flow of that net profit erosion that we're seeing by maximizing my potential on those OEM programs. And then the other side of it is we do have bloat in our inventories. We do have overstock of our inventories. If all of a sudden, a model is at the end of its, model line life cycle, we're going to see the day supply of that start eking up, and we're going to have stuff that's going to be kind of bloating out there. And those are the ones that we see, at $10,000 off MSRP, et cetera. Those are ones that, we know that, we're having to price those things. We got enough incentive support, enough discount support, to get behind those things. Imagine adding a little bit of volume to those things, marketing volume, VDP activity, and we're going to sell through those pieces of inventory fairly quickly. Moving on there, when you think about repricing or how to go through this, we've built out a decision tree, and it's really the end result here is hey, listen, I've got this car sitting on the lot. It's a depreciating asset. It's aging out. Logic and common practice has always been reprice. But do I really need to do that? And is pricing going to drive that desired result there? And I would say if we don't have the metrics to measure what's happening there, then repricing is only one piece there. If we're not looking at the analytics and the VDP activity and the engagements on each one of those vehicles and utilizing the data that's available in our website analytics to put a plan and strategy together behind those things, then all we're doing is repricing and throwing margin out the window there. So kind of one of the last things I wanted to leave you with here is if any of this sounds like something that would be of interest, or it's like, you know what, I would like to look at my engagements and my BDP activity and all of that. How do I do that? How do I get started? We put together kind of a how-to doing that within Google Analytics, or we'd be happy to have a discussion with you and kind of walk through how to do that and where some of the learnings and the insights can come from. Adding that additional piece of data into your decision making there quickly becomes a discussion about, is it more about price or is it more about the marketing? And we can quickly cipher through which way I need to go and make better decisions on that particular model, on a particular vehicle there, based in our individual markets, to help drive up where those margins were, to kind of ebb the curve there, ebb the flow there of that margin erosion, and start bringing those margins back up in line with some of the more historical averages that we've seen there. So with that, I wanted to thank everybody for the time today. We wanted to open up the floor and see if there was any questions or comments.
Great information from our special guest for today's webinar. That's Mark Connor, who is the Senior Vice President of Channel Strategy at LotLinx. And today's webinar, again, protect your margins by improving inventory marketing efficiency. And if you have questions for Mark, please use the chat function and the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel to share your question, and we'll get to as many as we can here during our allotted time. And just as a reminder, we are recording today's webinar, so please be sure to watch your inbox for a message containing a link to that recording so you can review the great information that Mark has already shared and distributes that link around your store so other colleagues can watch the presentation as well. And just to get our conversation started, Mark, if you could just, perhaps maybe it's a no-brainer, but maybe across the board, how closely are dealerships watching those VDP metrics? Is it something that some dealerships perhaps aren't watching as closely as they should be? Just what's your assessment of how closely dealerships are monitoring that particular metric of their business?
I think it's I think on a curve, if you will, I would say probably about a third of the stores are looking at and using that measurement and looking at VDP activity and factoring that into their marketing decision. There's still the majority that may not be doing that right now to enough of a degree that it's really informing their marketing decisions there. I would suspect of all the people that we have tuned in today, I would suspect that these people probably fall in that first third. At least there's enough interest level that they're looking at and engaging on that side of it. But I would say that the majority are still not. It's one of the things that when we put up the chart in this show, the activity, the VDP activity per VIN, what a difference that really makes for informing the marketing decision tree, if you will, and how should I move these things out. Today, in order to be, competitive and dominate your market, you're going to have a more robust marketing strategy than, parking on the front line, hanging more balloons on it, and just being the cheapest guy on the row there. It's going to take more today.
Again, the voice you're hearing is our special guest for today's webinar. That's Mark Connor, who is the Senior Vice President of Channel Strategy at LotLinx. And if you have a question for Mark, please use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And a dealer is asking Mark, they've determined that the vehicle is priced correctly. They've used the tools at their disposal to determine that. What promotional tactics have you seen be effective to help the marketing traction for that vehicle when the dealer knows that it's priced correctly?
So it kind of falls in, from a digital perspective, falls into two areas. It would be either, put that vehicle in a separate SEM campaign, or then some sort of display style campaign that's going to go out in the marketplace and start building up that interest level or activity. one of the unique things that LotLinx does is we are out there measuring the shopping activity within a marketplace. So we have the ability to match up the shopper to that unique piece of inventory in a very cost-effective way and bring them directly into the store there. In the old school sort of ways, what we used to do was we created liner ads, and we'd put that vehicle in a newspaper and, would promote it and advertise it in that way, and magically that car would sell through. In today's digital world, it's a little bit more complex, and that's really kind of one of the solves that LotLinx brings to the marketplace. If you thought about LotLinx as my online digital liner ads, that would probably be a good context to think about LotLinx.
Again, our guest for today's webinar is from LotLinx. That's Mark Connor, who is the Senior Vice President of Channel Strategy at the firm. For today's webinar, protect your margins by improving inventory marketing efficiency. And Mark, throughout your presentation, you've shared a lot of great metrics and how important analysis is. From your experience, what do the metrics show when dealers are analyzing their operating profits, when they take into consideration some factory bonus programs or some other avenues that might be available to them versus without? What type of analysis have you seen and can be orchestrated through the LotLinx program to look at operating profits when factory incentives are involved and when they're not?
Yeah, good question. So I think, in relation to really those stair-step programs and those factory incentives, I mean, we're seeing a reliance on from a few of the manufacturers, pretty heavily on those stair-step programs to help move the volume through the dealer, and they provide a huge financial windfall if you hit the marks, and if you don't, there's much sadness at the end of the month there for the dealership. So the goal is obviously to hit those things and to go for it on that front there. What it takes to get there and to bring through that so that we are achieving those profitability ways, because sometimes some of those franchises, the only way that we make money in the new car department, for instance, is when we hit those things, just because of the competition levels in the marketplace, pricing, etc. I mean, we're pricing those things, we're paying consumers to take those things. The point I'm trying to make here is how do dealers hit it and how do they do it? The winning strategy I see over and over and over again is the operator in the store sits down and says, you know what, and breaks it down by model line and looks at the model segments in the marketplace and knows, hey, if it's F-150, that's the leading truck segment in the marketplace, that's great. Am I getting my share of F-150? Okay, check that box. The next model segment that I traditionally see across the country is in the CUV, SUV, compact SUV segment. Those generally bundle up to be the number one, number two, number three, move them around, depending on the market. And we see that, in a Ford store, are we taking advantage of the Escapes, EcoSports, Explorers to meet that market demand in there, rather than just letting a Subaru clean the clock on compact SUV, CUV, or letting a Honda, just have their unfair share of that marketplace? I mean, there's things that each one of the manufacturers have to compete in those things and compete in each one of those segments. But that's really kind of the point I was making earlier. It takes a unique strategy for each one of those models to capitalize on what your opportunity is in the marketplace. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that a Ford EcoSport is going to outsell the Subaru in the marketplace. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is can I go and position those EcoSports to maximize my opportunity in that segment there instead of just giving it up? And in doing so, do I pick up incrementally a couple of more units a month within that model line? And then you just keep going down the line. Where does car fit in? Where does midsize and small car fit into all of that? What's my opportunity there? Again, if I'm a Ford store, they're doing away with cars, but car still represents, it might be the fourth or the fifth largest segment in the marketplace. car still represents, passenger cars represented over 40% of the sales last year. So there's still a big market there in cars. I don't need to just give it up. What I need to do is position my focuses, et cetera, in that segment there and figure out how to go out and get those in the marketplace or go get those units there. Again, instead of giving up those units to the Hondas and the Camrys of the world, you know what? I would just get my share of those things, and then incrementally I'll pick up another 2, 3, 4 more units, whatever it is, a month. And at the end of the month there, all of a sudden I've gained another 10, 15 units a month just by maximizing my opportunity in each one of those segments and building a strategy out that's going to address the addressable market in each one of those things, in each one of those segments.
Again, the voice you're hearing, that's Mark Conner, who is the Senior Vice President of Channel Strategy at LotLinx, for today's webinar titled Protect Your Margins by Improving Inventory Marketing Efficiency. And just as a reminder, we are recording this webinar, so please keep watch of your inbox for a link to the recording so you can revisit the great presentation that Mark has made, as well as the information that LotLinx has put together and shared with other individuals at your dealership. And to round us out, Mark, closing moments here. We are now into certainly the second half of 2019. Just what do you suggest is how long a dealership should take to evaluate its marketing strategy to perhaps make some changes, and then at the same time, how long should they allow those potential changes to season to further evaluate how effective those changes might be? So kind of a two-part question to round us out.
Yeah.
Just how much due diligence to examine what changes could be made, and how long before an evaluation to see the effectiveness?
So we'll take the first part of the question, how soon or how often should I evaluate my overall strategy? I think you start the month on your overall strategy. How soon do I change it up really depends on what my progress is throughout the month. And I would use the example, if I'm doing a stair-step program, I decided to go for it this month on the stair-step program. I get to the halfway point of the month and my volumes just are not going to be there. So I'm going to have to change up that strategy and move away from that, because otherwise, if I continue at this pace, I'm never going to make my objective, and I'm going to be just giving up a bunch of extra margin that I probably don't need to do. The converse of that is also true, right? So I would say at the beginning of the month, you've got to start off by what is it that I'm trying to do? What is it that I want to do? Where's my opportunity for me to maximize incentives, stair-step, et cetera? So you start off with that, and then you're going to evaluate that. I mean, every car person in the world, they're looking at the board every day and looking at how many units I got out, how many more I got to go, what's my plan for the month, et cetera. But from a marketing perspective, evaluating that weekly to about every 2 weeks and make sure I'm pacing there, et cetera. How long, once I set up a campaign and it's going, I've got to give that, particularly on the digital side of things, I have to give that some time for it to go into the market, to resonate within the market, and then for the campaigns to optimize out. So generally that's a 30-day to 60-day curve. Tweaks within the campaign are fine. Just know that, to do a true evaluation on any one of those things, particularly on the digital side of things, that's going to take that 30 to 60 days before I get a real good understanding directionally which way this thing's going. Is it helping or is it hurting? Do I need to change, et cetera? But doing tweaks inside of it. And what I mean by that is if it's an SEM campaign and I've added some keywords in my campaigning, or I've added some geo into my campaigning, it's going to take a period of time, that 30 to 60 days, to be able to really truly measure the overall effectiveness of what those additions did there. But it's worth that review along the every 10 to 2 week cycle that I'm reviewing. Is it progressing like I think, or I think I'm going to have to make a bigger wholesale change at the end of 60 days? And I think every couple of weeks we're cycling through that stuff, with the beginning of the month coming up in there, resetting of the overall global part of the strategy, the umbrella piece, and then rolling through the month and doing my micro changes or micro adjustments, if you will, the beginning of the month, I update or reset an umbrella strategy, and away I go. Some franchise, make radical changes every month. Most, I would say, kind of stay, particularly within a season, have, kind of an overall, is it trucks, is it whatever it is for the summer selling season. That seems to be what it is for the next, 60 to 90 days. So my global strategy probably doesn't update and change a whole bunch, but those micro adjustments through, it's done on an every 10 days to 2 week time period.
And a great way to leave it. That's Mark Connor, who is the Senior Vice President of Channel Strategy at LotLinx. Mark, thank you so much for the great information and strategy suggestions.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
And for all of us at Cherokee Media Group, I'm Nick Zulovich. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you again next time.